Our big stat, the unofficial media poll had Will Johnson of Michigan as the preseason Defensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten. 7 players got at least 1 vote. You see them here. Jay Higgins of Iowa, he of the 171 tackles a year ago, was second. Mason Graham, widely considered a top 5 draft pick, finished third. You have 3 Buckeyes, 2 Wolverines among the top 7. No one from any of the 4 new schools. So we asked Anthony to do a similar thought experiment, counting it down, Letterman style, from 5 to 1, your top 5 defenders of the Big Ten. Where do you start?
You know what a big Seacrest guy I am. So I'm going to start at number 5, working up a Seacrest style. And it's a player who's gone through a position change in Abdul Carter in State College. And, he was already fantastic as a linebacker, but, between himself and James Franklin and now Tom Allen as a defensive coordinator, they've made the decision that they're going to get the opportunity to see how well he can rush the passer, how much they can get from him coming off the edge. And there is so much speed and tenacity on that Penn State defense. He'll have Deni Dennis Sutton on that defensive front with him as well. And so there will be other players who folks will have to pay attention to, but the speed and tenacity of Abdul Carter shows up everywhere else. Now, at number 4 on the list is an Iowa Hawkeye. Now, talking about position switches, this isn't from last season to this. Sebastian Castro switches positions all throughout the game for Phil Parker. He plays the cast position for him, but it means you might be a safety, you might be a nickel corner, you might be an off-ball linebacker at different points, and he is money at every spot that Phil Parker puts him at. And so for Iowa's defense to have a guy like that, the reason I'm so excited about Sebastian Castro is that he is a throwback type of player that can play with physicality. You see big hits, you see him thumping folks. It's fun to watch.
So many Iowa players could be on there. I mean, you have 8 returning starters from that great defense a year ago. So those are 5 and 4. Where are you going with number 3?
I'm going to get some West Coast flavor in with this one in Jeffrey Bassa and what he brings for the Oregon Ducks. He was a guy who was a DB and a wide receiver in high school. And I was talking about physical development a little bit earlier in the show. We have seen his body mature and evolve, and he has always been a playmaker, even going back to his true freshman season. Had an opportunity to consider the National Football League, decided to return for another year in Eugene. He is one of the most formidable linebackers in the country, and he has a former Iowa Hawkeye, Justin Jacobs, who mans that linebacker core with him, so that's going to be an outstanding tandem. We're actually going to keep a very similar theme going here, where at number 2, I've got Caleb Downs on the list. And yes, he's a guy who could have been number 1 on this list because a lot of folks think he's the most fantastic defender entering the Big Ten Conference this season. I happen to agree as far as the guys entering the Big Ten. I've asked a number of beat writers, who's the best player on Ohio State's defense? Every one of them so far has said Caleb Downs. So what he adds to a Jim Knowles defense that was already just remarkable with what they could do to opponents, the stuff of legend may be there in Columbus as long as the team goals end where everyone hopes they will be.
SEC Freshman of the Year a year ago. He was fantastic when we were there for camp. So we're down to the final guy. Who are you going with at number 1?
It is a Michigan Wolverine. It is not the Michigan Wolverine that most folks would anticipate.
The contrarian.
It is not Will Johnson, even though Will Johnson may end up being the highest drafted defender to come out of the Big Ten after this season, but it's Mason Graham because of the job that's required on the interior of that Michigan defense, and he does all of it really well. Mason Graham is a block eater, a block stuffer, a run defender, a pass rusher. He is so technically sound and tenacious. When you break down the film of what he does along that defensive front for the Wolverines, the only player on the field that you say might actually be doing a job anywhere similar to him within that Wolverines front 7, within any other player on the field, is the guy who lines up next to him, Kenneth Grant. And so that's part of my theme throughout the list here, the magnificent players who are on the list, but all of them accompanied by a teammate who plays at an astounding level as well. So what I'm eager to see is the production we get from these individuals because they're not out here on some island by themselves doing things alone.
There is talk that Mason Graham, in fact, there are drafts out there, mock drafts that have him as the number 1 pick in the draft for next year. The last defensive tackle, number 1 overall pick, Big Daddy Dan Wilkinson. Yeah, from Ohio State. So I mean, that's 30 years ago. It's been a long time since we've seen this even as a possibility, but he is that good.